You fool! You thought I would be talking about the gladiators in this video, didn't you? Well, you're wrong. We're going to be talking about the Italian blood sport that takes rugby and mixes it with extreme violence. Because if it's not obscure,
I don't want it.
So, if the concept of bare-knuckle brawl Italian soccer with MMA and bullfighting elements piques your interest, you'd better stick around, because today, we're talking about Calcio Fiorentino. To kick things off, we're gonna have to explain the rules of the sport. Luckily, in 1580, a man by the name of Giovanni de Baldi spelled it all out for us right here. Let's see. Calcio is a public game of two teams of young men, on foot and without arms, who in affable manner aid forward. Right, that's gonna get us nowhere, so I'm just gonna explain it to you in plain English. Take a town square, put a fence around it with some aspect ratio of 2 to 1. So, you got 2 squares, bam, put them together, you got a field. On the end of each field, spanning the entire width, you got nets. Then, you have 27 players per team. Starting at the goal side, you got 4 goalies, then 3 fullbacks. Forward of them, you got 5 halfbacks. And finally, lined up at midfield, you have 15 fucking linemen. Yes, 15. And the goal of the game is simple. Cross all of these people by any means necessary to get your ball into the opponent's net and score a point. Be careful. If you miss the net high on your attempt, the other team gets a half point.
Divide that by 9, please.
What does any means necessary include? Well, this sport has no substitutions allowed. So, if a player happens to get too injured to play on, then, well, one less player you need to get through. Punching, kicking, choking, wrestling, tackling, headbutting, none of these are off the table. Now, who in the fuck would be insane enough to get this sport started in Middle Ages Florence? The answer is the Florentine nobility. That's right, starting in the 1400s, this was considered a nobleman's sport, played between January, after the Feast of the Epiphany, and March, at the start of Lent. And when it got started, the rules were lax. When I say people just made shit up on the fly, I mean it. All the things I mentioned earlier were there, and additionally, you were allowed to use multiple teammates to gang up on individual opponents. Hell, even biting, though considered in poor taste, was not explicitly banned. So how in the fuck was this considered a game for noblemen? Well, in the time of the Renaissance, the wealthy Italian noble and merchant classes were using all that free time digging up the Roman Empire's old garbage and obsessing over it. That's why it was called the Renaissance. It was a rebirth of classical Roman and Greek traditions and knowledge. You're probably most familiar with this concept in Renaissance art and Renaissance architecture, but this applied to Calcio Fiorentino as well, as it was very likely based on records of Harpastum, an old Roman game with very similar rules. This is why the sport got its air of nobility. It was kind of a Roman revivalist sport, and the privilege of such Roman leisure was locked off only to those rich enough to get away with not having to work. The hyper-violent nature of the sport also squared well with earlier medieval constructions of nobility based on martial prowess, because what is power if not the point of the sword? It's worth noting that the nobility of other nations did look on this with abject horror. The English, for example, thought that football may rather be called a friendly kind of fight than a play of recreation, a bloody and murderous practice more than a fellowly sport or pastime. But who gives a fuck about the English? A simple look at the pedigree of famous Calcio players lets us know just what kind of high society game this was. To note, Calcio is played by the vast majority of male Florentine counts and dukes, the Medici family, and multiple popes. In particular, Clement VII, Leo XI, and Urban VIII all loved the sport so much that they'd organized and played games of this hyper-violent sport on Vatican grounds. And if you think the image of popes and cardinals beating the ever-loving fuck out of each other is as absurd as it gets,
But I'm not done yet.
I'm going to caveat this next part by saying I only found the following story on the Wikipedia page, and none of the academic sources I saw mentioned it. However, I am choosing to believe and tell this story to you because it is very funny. That being said, fair warning to you all, take the following anecdote as entertainment and not history. You have been warned. This sport was obviously a very big spectator sport in the Renaissance, but sometimes, after the initial flurry of violence, Calcio players would get tired and the fighting would die down, which means the audience would get bored. However, the Florentine nobility had a method to rectify this situation.
Come on, bite his fingers off! You're playing like it's Sunday school!
This match is so boring. They're all just standing there, squaring up and not throwing any punches.
Well, look on the bright side. At least nobody's dead. Yet.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem. Come on, Tartaglia, get him in a chokehold! You're playing like you've got a
Hey, you own bowls, right?
Yeah, my dad is the richest man in Florence. Of course I own bowls.
Do you know what'd be really funny?
That's right. They would supposedly introduce live bulls into the mix from time to time if regular play got too boring. How noble. Side tangent, I don't know what the hell it is with Mediterranean Europe and recreationally fucking around with live bulls, but Spain, Italy, and Occitan France, you all have severe self-preservation problems. Anyway, as the centuries wore on, the French started to overtake Italy as dominant European force. And as it did, the character of nobility changed from martial prowess to a disdain for labor and the embrace of leisure. This spelled doom for Calcio because the Florentine game was, far from leisurely. The Florentine nobility quickly felt that the sport was brutish and unrefined, and while it is hilarious that it took them 200 years to come to that conclusion, it wasn't exactly conducive to Calcio's survival, and so Calcio Fiorentino would go on to die slowly and quietly. But if the sport died, where the hell am I getting all this footage of juiced up Italians beating the ever-loving shit out of each other? Well, that's from real games of Calcio that are still played to this day. And on that front, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the sport got revived in the 1930s. The bad news is that it was revived by Benito Mussolini. Yeah, it turns out when you strip Calcio down to its bare bones, you end up with a sport of hyper-violent masculine competition that harkens back to an idea of bloodline nobility. It's no surprise that Mussolini saw Calcio as a petri dish for fascism because all the elements are right there. This is also no surprise because fascists have used sport as an arena to push propaganda ever since the beginning, and they continue to do so to this day. Luckily, as the fascists were mostly brought to heel in Italy, the sport of Calcio Fiorentino seems to have dropped the historical associations that made it fascist and kept the ones that made it interesting to watch. In the modern day, teams still wear Renaissance-era uniforms, and they even march in formation with pikemen to the Piazza Santa Croce before each tournament. They now have 2 more team members, a captain and a standard bearer whose entire job is to call the shots and keep their players from starting uncontrolled fights, respectively. And apparently that didn't work too well, because since the 1980s, 2 tournaments went without a winner because of uncontrolled brawls. If you want to join in and play this game today, you can, with the caveat that you have to move to Florence, and that the team you play on is going to be determined by which quarter of the city you reside in. They've taken away the bullfighting minigame, unfortunately, but they did recently make a rule that you can't be a convicted felon if you do want to play. Apparently that was to stop all the uncontrolled brawls. There's 4 teams in the modern sport: Azzurri, Rossi, Bianchi, and Verdi, respectively. Azzurri has historically dominated the June tournament. That being said, Rossi did win the title last year, so Azzurri is likely to be out for blood. In the past, the winning teams would receive a live cow as a prize, but in the modern day, they play for nothing but the honor of their neighborhoods and a free dinner at the end of it all. If you want to learn more about the game, the first episode of the Netflix series Home Game is dedicated entirely to it, and that's where I first heard about this sport many years ago. In addition, you can watch it live on June 24th at Dazen.com, alongside such events as hot men and sexy boys. I shit you not, this was the first search result when I tried to look up this year's tournament date. Anyway, that's all I've got in this wild tale of Florentine soccer. There's no grand moral here, I just thought this is a really interesting sport that I want more people to know about. You all have been wonderful, I've been Pip, and go check out Bark Bark Meow. They were really fun to work with and run a very good furry podcast, as well as each having their own individual things that they're working on. I'd also like to thank Bark Bark Meow for the grade A cocaine they give me when we started to work on this collaboration. All their links will be in the description, and I expect you to click all of them. I'll see you all at Fursuit Calcio, coming to a furry con near you. Goodbye!
Take 2. Ugh. This match is so fuck. I can't ugh. Yep, keep going, yep. Ugh. Ugh. This match is so boring. They're all just fuck, I can't do this.
Yeah, what the fuck? I should have already seen blood by now. Come on, Tartaglia! Fuck him up, you bitch!
Twist his dick off! Twist his dick off!